Welcome back, true believers and all you merry Marvelites, to another very exciting episode of Marvel's Avengers 101. So even though we have pretty much had little to no news regarding the Avengers project throughout the entire month of January, and nothing so far majorly within February, the latest installment of the Prequel comics did release. And just to remind all of you, in case you did forget, the Avengers project is receiving its own standalone Prequel comic tie-in series that do lead into the very beginning events of the game. And just as a small recap, the previous issues that we have received of the series so far do in fact relate to Iron Man and Thor, whereas the newest issue is now regarding the Incredible Hulk. And while we have been initially receiving one issue per month regarding to each individual team member of the Avengers, we're actually going to be receiving the two final comics of the series both within the month of March, starting off with Captain America on March 18th, followed by Black Widow's issue, which is going to end off the series on March 25th. So even though we may have to wait a little over a month to see how this series is actually going to conclude, we are going to break down what exactly happens within this particular issue relating to Bruce Banner. Now again, each of these individual issues are just meant to be miniature one-offs to lead up to the beginning of the game's story pertaining to A-Day. So while there may not be any major plot points that may show up within the game, there is still a lot of narrative context that these prequel comics provide, which do add on to the larger world building that this game is going to dive into. And for starters, the main character that is primarily highlighted within this issue directly, besides that of Bruce Banner, is actually a fellow scientist by the name of Monica. Now, we have seen Monica appear previously within this prequel comic series during Iron Man's issue, but even within Hulk's particular comic, we still don't know exactly who Monica is or what her role is at S.H.I.E.L.D. And while we weren't actually given Monica's full name within any of these issues so far, I would actually bet my bottom dollar that she would be none other than AIM's Scientist Supreme of Monica Rappaccini. So if you're familiar enough with the comics, Monica is actually one of the head scientists at AIM directly, who is actually qualified enough to take the position of Scientist Supreme. Not to mention that both Bruce and Monica do share a very interesting relationship with one another, both within the mainstream comics as well as this individual issue specifically. But seeing how close they are within the Marvel's Avengers universe so far, I do think it's safe to say that Bruce is not aware of Monica's true intentions because of how she's closely studying the Hulk's characteristics. It definitely seems like Monica is extremely interested in learning on how to fully harness the Hulk's power and fully use it for her own personal gain. And while she was only briefly showcased within the beginning of this comic, it makes me even more interested to see how her character could be fully applied within the final game itself. But as for the next character that we're almost immediately introduced to right after Bruce finishes up his work with Monica is actually that of an extremely recognizable Marvel villain. And due to the fact that AIM are actually going to be the main antagonist throughout the entirety of the Avengers project, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if this particular character turned out to be the final boss. However, there is a highly likely chance that Marvel could potentially end up changing his main origin story from how it is within the comics to how it could end up within this game's narrative. And if you haven't guessed by now, I'm mainly referring to the prime suspect of none other than George Tarleton, who, if you don't know, ends up becoming none other than MODOK. So essentially within the Avengers project universe, George is in fact working directly at S.H.I.E.L.D. and does have a bit of a rivalry with that of Bruce and a little bit of an attachment towards Monica. And while George essentially ends up requesting Bruce's assistance for his own unique research projects, he then goes on to warn him by saying that his model isn't stable enough and that he should probably give it a bit more time. But of course, George directly ignores Bruce's advice and in turn ends up creating a huge accidental lab explosion within the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. And in doing so, George's experiment accidentally ended up fusing electrical energy with two individual S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, turning them both into the main Hulk villain of Zzzax. And as you would expect, this sudden threatening encounter forces Bruce to turn into the Hulk in order to stop Zzzax, and basically has their fight go all the way from the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters to a nearby New York harbor. And after the major fight between Hulk and Zzzax, it ends up causing a massive shortout of electricity across the entire northeastern seaboard. But after all the damages died down, Bruce is just simply trying to recover within a nearby hospital where Tony Stark ends up paying him a visit to make sure that he's doing okay. And while the essential dialogue exchange between Bruce and Tony practically foreshadows what's going to happen after the events of A-Day, it does point out one other factor which I find extremely interesting. So like we know already, after the 5-year tragedy of post-A-Day, Bruce is going to be in a fully hulked out state due to the fact that he feels extremely guilty of not being able to fully save everyone during that tragedy. And just being able to see the dual identity struggle between Bruce and Hulk directly within this comic is something that I really hope the narrative of the game fully expands upon. When you stop and think about it for a second, Bruce is actually a pretty tragic character, so I'd be all for it if the narrative within the game actually showcases what a great character he is throughout the entirety of the story. And while we do get some other moments of foreshadowing within this comic by seeing George Tarleton actually talk to Tony Stark about his experiments that he could further produce alongside of him, there is one line that comes from Tony when he's talking to Bruce that fully stands out as the most important throughout this entire conversation. And as Tony goes on to say, that electrical giant thing, whatever it was, the Hulk stopped it before it killed anyone else. That's what matters. The rest of it? That's all just a big fat tax write-off for the Bugle's most eligible billionaire bachelor. So yes, we do directly get a reference to the Daily Bugle's existence within the Avengers Project comic book. And again, even though it hasn't been officially confirmed for sure, I still am fully crossing my fingers that this means that the Avengers Project and Spider-Man PS4 could potentially be within the same universe one way or another. And since we do know that Marvel's Avengers is coming fully equipped with exclusive PS4 benefits tailored to the game directly on that one platform, I'm still hoping that it could relate to Spider-Man in any way. But overall, everyone, out of all the other Avengers comics that have released so far, this one is definitely my most favorite and definitely has the most narrative intrigue out of all the other ones. While I'm still not a major fan of how the artwork is portrayed within this comic overall, I do like how it does add a lot more world building to what we can expect once the full game finally releases on September 4th, 2020. And seeing them introduce other characters within this game's universe like that of Zzzax, Monica Rappaccini, and MODOK, it makes me even more interested to see who could be introduced next within the Captain America comic. But I guess we'll just have to wait until March 18th to find out who that's going to be. But until that time comes, everyone, thank you all so much for watching, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. What did you think of Hulk's prequel comic, and what were your most favorite standout moments? For me, besides seeing the slight indication of the possible connection to Spider-Man PS4's universe with the Daily Bugle name drop, I'm really curious to see how George's character is going to be expanded upon within this game. But hopefully we end up receiving some actual game information sooner rather than later instead of just reading these simple one-off comics. But until the next update, everyone, thank you all so much for watching, stay merry Marvelites, and peace out.
I know I have standing orders to neutralize you, but you're just such a cuddle bug. A love ticket.
I'm confused.
Isn't it great? Here's my private shield frequency. Call me on it. And MODOK, do not stand up a federal agent. I'm just kidding.